Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Reporters. Now on March 11, 2011, a powerful earthquake and tsunami in northeast Japan provoked the world's worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl. Just like then, thousands were evacuated. But unlike in Ukraine and Belarus, the Japanese government has tried to make the affected area fit for human habitation and has now reopened more than half of it. But most of those who have been told to go back have refused to do so. This next report by our correspondents Mary Linton, Ophelie Giamotaris, Guillaume Bression and Justin McCurry.
This is the day Toshiko Ito has been waiting for. The Fukushima evacuee has travelled 250 kilometres by bus to witness the rebirth of her hometown. The reopening is being marked with bunting and traditional dance. More than 6 years after it was evacuated, Tomioka, just 10 kilometres from the nuclear plant, is coming back to life.
Oh, it's you. It's been such a long time. How are you?
Seeing you again is making me cry. Are you coming back to live in Tomioka?
Yes, I'm planning to come back.
To return or not? That's the question all former residents are asking themselves. Ito has made up her mind. Even if her old home has to be torn down after years of standing empty, she'll build a new one in the centre of town.
People of my age think only of the past. We would like to come back and be able to live alongside our former neighbors. But in truth, we may never be able to go back to the days when we used to go fishing or pick fruit in the mountains. As it is, we don't even know if they're safe to eat.
But even those who are eager to return have mixed feelings. In an effort to calm their fears, the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is here to convince them it's safe.
I promise that I will do everything possible to promote this town's revival so that you, the people of Tomioka, can once again be proud of being born and living here.
But Ito isn't convinced by Abe's optimism. With so few ready to return, she expects a lonely existence in her hometown. Once the ceremony is over, the former residents return to the regions they were evacuated to, some of them a long way from Fukushima. After the triple meltdown in 2011, the government ordered the evacuation of 80,000 people living near Fukushima Daiichi, although tens of thousands more left the area voluntarily. But unlike the Soviet authorities in the aftermath of Chernobyl, which left areas near the plant as they were, Japan has worked hard to clean up and revive communities affected by radiation. More than half the evacuation zone has now been reopened to residents. But official reassurances that radiation is at safe levels are not enough to convince most people. To date, only around 10% have returned, forcing the national and local governments to find other ways to repopulate the area. Naraha, 15 kilometres from the power plant, was one of the first towns to reopen in 2015. Today, its streets are still eerily quiet. So these amateur seamstresses decided to do something about it.
It looks like a real person, don't you think?
Just 1,500 of Naraha's 7,300 residents have returned, and most of them are elderly. Their solution to the lack of neighbours is to make their own in the form of life-size dolls.
People here feel isolated because everybody had to leave the town. They feel particularly lonely in their homes, so they asked us to make dolls to keep them company. Elderly residents really like our child dolls. They hold them in their arms and say things like, "You're really cute." They like them because there are so few actual children here.
Dozens of dolls now populate places like the local post office, the police station and shops. Real customers, though, are still rare. The Odaka district of Minamisoma City, which lifted its evacuation order last year, has focused on reopening its schools in order to attract families with children, the group most reluctant to return to Fukushima.
Wait, it looks nicer like this.
Makiko and her daughter Honoka have been living in temporary housing for most of their time as evacuees. Today, they're returning to their abandoned home 19 kilometers from Fukushima Daiichi.
We weren't able to come back before the school reopened, so we have been waiting impatiently.
There's been much debate over whether it's safe to bring children back to areas that were affected by radiation. But today the controversy has been put to one side, as children and parents attend a ceremony to mark the start of the school year.
I am very happy that you are able to study again here in Odaka. This is a step forward after 6 years of hardship.
Without its children, Odaka's future looks bleak. Even so, just 12% of the pupils eligible to attend this school have returned. Unless more children come, the school will face a gradual decline in numbers.
None of the children my daughter was friends with before the disaster have returned. She's the only one. I just wish more of them had come back.
In Tomioka, about 10 kilometers away from the power plant, local hunters are encouraging people to return by killing wild animals, whose number has multiplied in the years the area has been left abandoned by residents.
There's a risk that people who move back will be attacked by wild boars, which also destroy crops. That's a huge problem for farmers.
So destructive are the wild boar that Tomioka's government has even put a price on the head of each one killed, €200. This temple has been overrun by raccoons.
The raccoons destroyed the door and got in that way. I've cleaned up a little bit, but it's still in a terrible state. Just look at it. This has become a problem since the nuclear crisis. Houses were left empty, and the wild animals moved in.
None of the animals, not even wild boar, which is considered a delicacy, can be eaten because their flesh contains radioactive cesium. The campaign to repopulate abandoned parts of Fukushima hinges on efforts to rid them of potentially harmful levels of radiation. The authorities have employed thousands of workers and spent billions of euros on decontaminating 1,000 square meters of land. But have they made it safe? One civic organisation says there's no clear answer.
We're now taking soil samples.
The group has taken multiple radiation readings in the same area. Today, they're focusing on the ground near a school in Namie, a town that recently opened to residents.
Workers have decontaminated the soil here. The soil is a different colour. Here the radiation is about 1 microsievert per hour, but over there it's 3 times higher. How are children supposed to know it's okay over here, but not over there? The neighbourhood may have reopened, but there's no one here. It's a ghost town. The average level we measured this week was 1.7 microsieverts an hour. That's very high.
Millions of cubic meters of contaminated soil have been stored in bags that now carpet large areas of Fukushima.
The bags of contaminated waste are about 5 deep beneath these black tarpaulin sheets.
People must be worried about living so close to radioactive waste. I know that I would be worried if I lived here.
Beyond this gate lies the most contaminated area of the Fukushima evacuation zone. For the authorities, it represents the final frontier. We're not allowed to enter without a representative from the Okuma town hall. After we pass through the gate, Yoshiyuki Takeuchi shows us a town that's remained untouched for almost 7 years.
I often used to go to this restaurant. Everything is in ruins. It makes me very sad. It's a complete mess compared to the way it looked almost 7 years ago. It makes you think, so this is what happens to a place when there is no one to look after it.
Confronted by the ravages of time and the high levels of radiation, local authorities might easily have given up all hope of reviving these neighbourhoods. But Okuma, which is just 5 kilometres from Fukushima Daiichi, did just the opposite. Rather than try to revisit the past, it's going to relocate its town centre several kilometres to a less contaminated area.
We're building houses and the town office here, but we'll also need a shopping mall, a hospital, a fire station, and a post office. We're going to build everything people need to go about their daily lives.
But who is this new town for? Takeuchi accepts that, like other parts of Fukushima, only a few former residents will return. But at least it won't be empty. Even today, about 700 nuclear workers live in Okuma, although it's still officially closed.
It was hard for TEPCO employees to travel to the plant every day, so the company decided to build housing here. Some people might ask why it's okay for nuclear workers to live here, while it's still off limits for ordinary residents. But under the current conditions, it's just not possible for residents to return.
The region will remain a temporary base for the legions of labourers and engineers working at the nuclear plant. Today, officials attend a ceremony to mark the opening of a high-tech research facility that will devise ways to decommission the damaged reactors. The centre has attracted some of the best minds in Japanese science, among them Yukihito Sato. The 30-year-old would never have dreamed of living here, so close to Fukushima Daiichi, if it hadn't been for the opportunities the new centre offers.
I wrote my thesis about radioactive fallout from Fukushima. I decided to come here because I was told that it would give me the opportunity to continue working on the issue.
But Sato's wife has refused to join him in Tomioka. She's less worried by radiation than the lack of infrastructure.
My wife is pregnant and there are no maternity wards in the area, so she stayed in Shiba, near Tokyo.
6 years after the evacuation, Prime Minister Abe and the local governments of Fukushima have promised to restore hope to the area. They say they'll transform it into a centre of excellence for nuclear decommissioning, as well as robotics and renewable energies. In short, a model for community regeneration.
Now, joining us here on the set is our correspondent from Japan, Mary Linton. Many thanks for being with us. Now, can you tell me, why is the government going to such extreme lengths to reopen the Fukushima no-go zone?
All the political leaders I spoke to say the same thing. Japan is a small country and they can't afford to lose parts of the territory, like what had happened to the former Soviet Union in 1986. But there are other reasons. One of them is their will to make up for their mistake. We know that the Fukushima nuclear disaster was caused because of a human mistake. So now they want to make it up to the people by decontaminating the affected areas and by giving a chance to the people to move back. In France, the same exact protocol exists. In case of a nuclear catastrophe, a decontamination program would be launched. But in the case of Japan, we can also ask ourselves if there's not a hidden agenda. We know that the government is pushing to have its nuclear industry up and running again. And they're thinking that by getting rid of what remains of this disaster, they'll be able to restart the other nuclear reactors.
Now, aside from radiation, what are the reasons that people are reluctant to go back?
It's a complicated issue. The Fukushima nuclear disaster occurred 6 years ago, and since then, many families have started a new life elsewhere. And many don't have the energy to start all over again and move back in the Fukushima region. And as you saw in the report, many of those cities have become ghost towns. There's nothing left. Everything needs to be rebuilt, from the post office to hospitals and schools, and there are no neighbors. So one can easily understand why people wouldn't want to move back there. When it comes to the issue of high radiation levels in and around the area, there's a complex debate between experts about whether or not it's dangerous for people's health. What we know is that the decontamination process can't get rid of all the radiation left there. For one, because some entire areas have been excluded from the decontamination program, like forests, for instance. So the people coming back, especially families with kids, know that they'll have to change their ways. They won't be able to take a stroll in the forest every day, for instance, and go pick mushrooms.
Fascinating. Many thanks for joining us here on The Set, Marie, and stay tuned on France 24 because there's a lot more news coming up.